When we remember a time, we remember moments. A kaleidoscope of the sights, the sounds, the emotions that remind us of the way we were. Our world. It's about time. Here are Linda Ellerbee and Ray Gandolf.
For the next hour, think of your television set as a time machine.
Buckle up tight and maybe turn down the volume. Where we're going tonight, it's loud and dangerous.
Welcome to a few extraordinary weeks in 1968. For the first time, the young are seeing history being made before it's censored by their elders. They see it in a national mirror called television. Our story takes place inside that mirror. It will begin in January in downtown Saigon, move through the snowy streets of New Hampshire, and end one Sunday night in March in the Oval Office and on television. It will be a sort of mini-series, more powerful than the winds of war. Call this one the Winds of Change.
As 1968 began, Lyndon Johnson was fighting a war on poverty in this country and a war on communists in Vietnam, and he apparently was having success on both fronts. Then his National Advisory Commission on Civil Disorders told the president that the country was moving toward two societies, one black, one white, separate and unequal, not the direction the Great Society was supposed to be going. As for the war in Vietnam in January, the president was getting rose-colored reports.
I said it here, I said it earlier this morning to the members of Congress. We're making steady progress in Vietnam.
I am absolutely certain that whereas in 1965 the enemy was winning, today he is certainly losing.
The enemy has been defeated in battle after battle.
Strange days have found us. Strange days have tracked us down.
In Vietnam, in early January, 500,000 Americans are fighting the enemy and fighting him on his own turf, in the jungles, the rivers, the rice paddies. The American government likes to say we have broken the back of the enemy, but there is a sense this January that something is about to happen.
Documents captured at Dak To recently indicate the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong may be beginning a new phase of all-out war.
We knew there was going to be a big attack.
General William Westmoreland is commander of all U.S. troops in Vietnam.
Our intelligence was not complete, but we were convinced that something major was going to happen.
January 31st. In coordinated attacks all over South Vietnam, the Viet Cong shatter the ceasefire they themselves have called in honor of Tet, the Lunar New Year.
I was sleeping in this little room on the 4th floor of our embassy in downtown Saigon.
Alan Wendt is the duty officer at the embassy that night.
All of a sudden, there was a loud explosion. So loud that it literally shook everything that was in this room. And I just could not imagine what was going on, but I quickly realized that we were being attacked.
A squad of 20 Viet Cong sappers, suicide commandos, has blown a hole in the wall of the embassy compound. Now they are inside the compound. As a small contingent of MPs and Marine Guards keep them at bay, Wendt gets an urgent call from Washington. The call is from the State Department Situation Room. The caller is Philip Habib.
He began to tell me as much as he knew from his limited point of view. It was quite clear that he needed a little bit of calming down, as you can imagine, and I wouldn't blame him. He was quite excited.
He said to me, "Alan, what the hell's going on out there?" And I held up the phone. I said, "Phil, listen to it." And just when I did that, another rocket thudded into the building, so he could actually hear what was going on.
There's machine gun fire now. No one seems to know here how many... A tremendous explosion in the compound.
Don North is covering the embassy attack for ABC News.
Some of the most dramatic gunplay, I suppose, was when one of the embassy officers had a grease gun and edged up to the window very, very carefully because he knew they were heavily armed sappers, reached the grease gun in without aiming and just sprayed it around inside the room. And moments later, Colonel Jacobson turned up inside the building, but unarmed. And someone threw him a forward pass of a .45 automatic, and he killed the last sapper alive in the embassy at that time.
When the battle ends, 19 Viet Cong sappers are dead. 5 Americans are dead, but the commandos never made it inside the embassy building itself.
So I went up to the top of the building, inspected every floor on the way down. When I came out of the building, it was about the largest concentration of media that I have ever seen. And I said, there have been some setbacks around the country, but this is going to result in a big defeat of the enemy. And they looked at me as if I didn't have all my faculties.
He always popped up to somehow put a good face on whatever was happening. But the reality this time just didn't wash with what the general was telling us.
The communists were beaten back, but they had changed the nature of the war, brought it out of the jungles by simultaneously attacking more than 100 cities and towns. The street fighting in Saigon was brought into our homes by television crews and by still cameramen like Eddie Adams.
And so I started taking pictures of just walking this prisoner. You know, he had his hands tied behind his back, and they were just leading him down the street. And I was standing there just watching what they were doing, and all of a sudden, General Luan, who was then a colonel, he was and I didn't know who he was at the time. He was actually a full colonel and the chief of police for South Vietnam. And as soon as he went for his pistol, as soon as he raised his pistol, I raised the camera, took a picture, not knowing that he was going to shoot him. And what had happened, then he put his pistol down, put it back in his holster, walked away, and came right by us, and he said, "They killed many of my men and many of your people," and walked away.
The prisoner had killed one of General Luan's officers, but his execution was summary and brutal. Adams' unforgettable picture won him a Pulitzer Prize and appeared on front pages all over the world. Satellites were beaming the horror of Tet into front rooms all over the world. President Johnson convened his advisors at the White House. His press secretary was George Christian.
He had no idea that it would be of the intensity that it was. And as more and more news reports and intelligence reports from Vietnam built up during that period, he became more and more concerned that things might come unraveled.
Still, President Johnson told the press corps on February 2nd that the Tet Offensive was not an enemy victory.
The biggest fact is that the stated purposes of the general uprising, a military victory or a psychological victory, have failed.
Hugh Sidey covered that White House briefing for Life magazine.
And I can remember precisely when the Tet Offensive struck. I mean, here you have a handful of troops that can bring explosives and attack the American embassy, and then they claim that they're winning this war and they've defeated the enemy. And we just said, it's obvious things are worse than anybody knows.
Jack Valenti was no longer a White House aide, but he remained a confidant of the president.
We blew the North Vietnamese away. They lost 40,000 men plus in that engagement. But in politics, as in real life, perception is reality. And what people saw on the television tube was perception, but it was also real to them. When you see Viet Cong 4 feet, 10 feet from the door of the U.S. Embassy before they were finally killed, somebody said, my God, if they can get that close to the embassy, the war's over.
The war wasn't over, and television didn't go away. Historian Will Durant put it like this: The hand that turns the dial rules the air. Come back to February 1968, to prime time, Grenoble, Vietnam, and Uncle Walter.
Our world will continue with winds of change in the winter of '68.
Our World, brought to you by General Foods Corporation and its many fine products. Satisfying your family is what General Foods is all about.
I can't believe you talked me into this.
Admit it. It's just too good to resist.
You're right, Saul. What's it called?
Fruit and...
Forget the fiber and fruit and fiber. You're gonna love it just for the taste.
Only Fruit and Fiber has all these lush combinations, overflowing with sweet fruit, fresh, crunchy nuts, and surrounded with the highest fiber flakes.
This is the greatest.
You're gonna love it just for the taste.
Post Fruit and Fiber cereal. Tastes so good you forget the fiber.
They say decaffeinated coffee is good for you. Then they turn around and get you wondering about the way it's decaffeinated. Well, the people who make Sanka want you to know that you can enjoy cup after cup of Sanka without a drop of worry. Because Sanka is decaffeinated with nothing but pure mountain water and the natural effervescence that makes water sparkle. Naturally decaffeinated Sanka coffee. Now, what are they going to say about that?
My baloney has a first name. It's O-S-C-A-R. My baloney has a second name. It's M-A-Y-E-R. Oh, I love to eat it every day. And if you ask me why, I'll say, 'cause Oscar Mayer had a way with B-L-O-G-N-A.
If the name's Oscar Mayer, it's quality meat and no fillers. Just the best that it can be.
How's that?
Sometimes your skin gets so dry you can scratch the word dry right on your hand. And the drier your skin, the more you need Vaseline Intensive Care Lotion. It soothes and starts healing dry skin on contact. That's today's Vaseline Intensive Care.
Some people think swabs are all the same, but you know Q-tip swabs are soft and safe, with 50% more cotton at the tip. Q-tip's brand cotton swab, because a swab by any other name is not the same.
Friday, make Webster a part of your team.
I'll be Jim McMahon.
Then Mr. Belvedere tackles the great outdoors.
I trust you slept well.
Not really.
Not accustomed to the sounds of the wild.
Yeah, some big fat thing kept yapping all night.
It's Mr. Belvedere right after Webster. Friday.
What is a high roller?
Lady Luck is smiling,
You are hot, Pump.
and Starman has a full house.
I think I'm developing a real sense of humor.
Welcome back to the lighter side of February 1968. The Nehru jacket was enjoying a brief season of glory, on its way from clothing store to Goodwill bag before you could say Jawaharlal Nehru. Gasoline was only about 34 cents a gallon, and still the oil companies felt they had to lure you into the station. They sponsored 304 giveaway contests of one kind or another that winter. Sinclair had Dino dollars. Sunny dollars were the big thing at Sunoco stations. If you had the right combination, matched up the right halves, you could win anything from $1 to $1,000. Didn't even have to buy gas. You didn't have to watch the war news on television either. It was pretty raw stuff. And if you didn't watch the news, stuck with the prime time shows, you'd hardly know there was a war on. Gomer Pyle, Marine, might as well be in Mayberry.
Pyle, I'm putting you in the color guard for parade formation on Saturday.
Golly!
And in Mayberry, Sheriff Andy Taylor wears the only uniform.
Forget about your cares, it is time to relax at the junction.
There are no protest marches in Petticoat Junction.
Television was very quiet.
Producer George Schlatter.
It had not changed noticeably in 10 years. It was all the family relationships, cowboy shows, and chit-chat. And here came this explosion in the middle of a sea of tranquility as far as television was concerned.
Sock it to me, sock it to me, sock it to me, sock it to me, sock it to me. Sock it to me?
Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In.
Schlatter's new comedy show that season was an exception to the television pablum diet. Lafayette had everything but a sacred cow. Anything was fair game. It fired scattershot at everything from LSD to LBJ.
I am the government.
Till I die.
Very interesting.
Don't blink, don't sneeze, you might miss something.
Item, Washington, D.C., 1988. President Ronald Reagan today denied once again that he is a candidate for the office of governor of California.
Schlatter's bosses were puzzled.
And the first time they saw it, NBC was very unhappy with it. They said, what did you do? You and your crazy friends just took a lot of our money and went out and had a good time. And we said, well, what's the problem? They said, well, nobody can understand it. And we said, well, you laugh, and the audience is certainly more intelligent than... And so they said, well, they would air it if we slowed it down. And then we knew we were right, so we went back and tightened it up a little bit more.
Well, it's time to say goodnight, Dick. Good night, Dick. Good night, Dick.
Good night, Dick.
Communications with our youth has broken down, so I have decided to visit them in Canada.
The inescapable war and President Johnson's handling of it dominate the presidential primary campaigns.
You say yes, I say no. You say stop, and I say go, go, go.
From the Democratic Party's left, Senator Eugene McCarthy declares war on the war.
And the entire history of this war in Vietnam, no matter what we call it, has been one of continued error and of misjudgment.
Senator Robert Kennedy is not yet a candidate, but he sounds like one.
The history of conflict among nations does not record another such lengthy and consistent chronicle of error as we have shown in Vietnam.
Candidate George Wallace is also unhappy.
And I would ask my Attorney General to proceed for indictments against every person in this country who advocates victory of the communists.
Is the Republican frontrunner a new Richard Nixon?
If people looking at me say that's a new Nixon, then all that I can say is, well, maybe you didn't know the old Nixon.
Michigan's Governor George Romney is also running, but he will withdraw before the first primary battle in New Hampshire in mid-March. In February, television took us to another snowy battlefield in Grenoble, France.
The 10th Winter Olympic Games, brought to you in color by satellite.
Cameras do not evaluate, they transmit, whether it's war pictures or the grace and beauty of the Olympics. Grenoble was the first Olympics broadcast in color, and with the then startling number of 36 cameras. Jim McKay covered the Olympics for ABC Sports.
We call them mini cams, but they had great long black cables with them instead of the slender cable that we have today. They were not remotely controlled, and they were huge. I don't know what they weighed, but they would break the back of even the strongest cameraman.
This country's best hope for a gold medal at Grenoble did not attend the opening ceremonies. 19-year-old Peggy Fleming.
The next morning at 6 a.m., we started competing. So my coach and parents didn't think that that was too wise to risk getting sick at this point and get overtired or whatever. And I watched it on TV.
The pressure more and more was on Peggy, although the skating is actually in the comparatively early part of the games. And there she was at Grenoble in her pale green dress, as I recall, skating what she said later I think was not her best performance.
I just wanted to get through it. I was 89 points ahead of the second girl, just going into the free skating phase. So all I had to do was stand up. I mean, I didn't have to give the best performance in free skating of my life. All I had to do was live through those 4 minutes. And I always thought, well, something's going to go wrong. I'm going to, pass out in the middle of this number. And when I got through it and I was still standing up, I thought, gosh, I guess I did it. It was wonderful. And you know, have the Star-Spangled Banner played in your honor. And I was real proud of myself and proud of the country that I was from.
The hero of the Olympics was Jean-Claude Killy of France, winner of 3 gold medals in skiing. But in the slalom, he had finished behind 2 skiers who were later disqualified. And one, Austria's Karl Schranz, protested.
He said, wait a minute. He said, on my second run where I missed that gate, the reason I missed the gate was because a guard or a policeman or somebody skied out in front of me on the course, and I would have hit him if I didn't ski off the course and miss the gate. The officials, we didn't see that.
Television came to the rescue with a not-so-instant replay.
Finally, the decision was made to come into our television truck. All the officials came in there for a couple of hours, as I recall, looked at the tape over and over again. So they watched and watched and watched, and finally they came out and said, sorry, nobody came out in front of you. Jean-Claude Killy wins the 3rd gold medal.
A wild race and a long day, but once again, Killy has done it.
As far as I know, and I'm pretty sure of it, that was the first time that television was ever used to decide the result of a sports event.
The Olympic wars on the electronic battlefield produced some medals and no casualties. But in Washington, it is the Vietnam War that continues to preoccupy most of the Johnson administration. Not everybody in the White House is so preoccupied. In February, Lady Bird Johnson holds a Discover America fashion show. For '68, these clothes were tame. Everywhere else, anything goes and everything went.
Color sky, Havana Lake. Color sky, rose carmethine. Alizari and crimson. Where your love like heaven. Where your love like heaven. Where your love like heaven.
Do people really dress like that? No. Then what are designers doing? One of them, John Weitz, explains.
Whatever it is that you read in retrospect of 18 years ago is the reflection of a lot of fashion shows we used to do. And fashion shows are usually enormous nonsense. They're very entertaining, and that's all.
Color in sky, Russian blue.
Alternatives to the suit and tie, the Nehru jacket, medallions, turtlenecks, and White's design for a ranchero scarf to be worn instead of a tie.
I tried to forget the flops, and I honestly don't remember. I'm sure that ranchero scarves were a flop.
Hey, Joe, where you going with that gun of yours?
February 24th. In Vietnam, the Marines retake the ancient city of Hue after a month of bloody, house-to-house fighting. The once beautiful city is destroyed in the process. The price in human lives is terrible. Later, we learned just how terrible. When the communists first took over, they executed 3,000 civilians. We didn't see that on television. What we saw and heard was that in 1 week, 542 Americans were killed in Vietnam. There were just too many bodies to ignore. Newspapers began to change their minds editorially. Doubts about Vietnam began to spread. The next to doubt was CBS anchorman Walter Cronkite.
I went to Dick Salant, who was our president of CBS News, and said, you know, I think that maybe it's time for one of us, and I'd like to be the one who does it, goes out there and says just what it looks like to a reasonably astute, informed observer.
Cronkite and his crew travel around Vietnam. He interviews officials, officers, and soldiers. And then on February 27th, in a primetime news special, Walter Cronkite said what had to be said.
I was going to have to say that I didn't think we were winning in Vietnam, that the Viet Cong offensive, the North Vietnamese offensive, indicated we were not in the position that we thought we were before the Tet Offensive. So I put together my piece, and at the end of the factual report, I said, I'm going to take off that hat now, factual reporter. I'm going to deliver a rare thing, these columns, a commentary.
When Cronkite came back and pointed out the flaws that he saw, it had an impression on Johnson, most certainly did. Well, I remember him telling me words to the effect, if we've lost Walter Cronkite, we're going to lose a whole lot of people.
One thing Lyndon Johnson was always good at was counting, or so he believed. That is Eugene McCarthy. He's the politician who said being in politics is like being in football. You have to be smart enough to understand the game and dumb enough to think it's important. What he meant was that he could count too. Come back to 1968, to the electronic battlefield of New Hampshire. Or is that a football field? Either way, bring your mittens. It gets real windy up there, even outdoors.
Come back to our world and winds of change in the winter of '68.
The good news is now you can save on the perfect combo, Weight Watchers Pizza and Diet Coke. So how can there be any bad news?
No more yearning, desire burning. No, what's the use? Now there's chocolate mousse. Yes, Weight Watchers deeply chocolate, velvety chocolate mousse. Weight Watchers, this is living.
Nissan's introduced more new cars in a year than anyone in history, plus a whole new attitude.
We got the power to make you move. We make you feel like driving. We make you feel like driving.
They're waiting for you, the wide-open Pulsar NX, the longest wide-body van, and Pathfinder, 4x4 of the year.
We make you feel like driving, and the name is Nissan.
You know, life's too short to worry about impressing other people. I mean, have you ever been really impressed by a person's credit card? What matters about a credit card is how it impresses me. MasterCard gives me what I want, and anything is possible. It goes where I want to go. Could be Timbuktu. When I want, day or night. Don't talk to me about impressions. Give me possibilities. MasterCard. Master the possibilities.
Nance, I'm gonna run the dishwasher.
It's not full.
Nancy Wade believes never run a dishwasher till it's full.
Another bowl, 3 more plates.
Not full.
The perfect way to prove lemon scent sunlight out cleans a leading brand on tough, starchy food.
4 bowls and a platter.
Now it's full.
After sitting all day, they really need lemon sunlight. In tests against the leading brand on tough, starchy food, Sunlight clean better.
Nice.
Now you can empty it.
Try lemon sunlight. It really stands up to dishes that sit.
Our world will be right back.
My green tambourine.
You never even thought about it? How it feel to be free?
On the Disney Sunday movie.
What are you doing? He steals slaves. Come on, Johnny!
Two friends' courageous race to freedom. History would call them the Liberators. Sunday,